Hi everyone. In this video I'm going to talk about factoring quadratic functions. And specifically we're going to be talking about how do I factor a quadratic function where the coefficient on my x squared term is a 1. So my leading coefficient is 1. Well, the way I'm going to start is to talk a little bit about factoring. And so when I say factoring, what I mean is I want to be able to write my quadratic equation in a form that looks something like this. So when I say factor, usually we talk about writing something as a product. So you're writing something as a multiplication. And so what I have here is I have two terms. I have x plus a and I have x plus b, and I'm multiplying them together. So the fact that I have these sets of parentheses like this means that we're multiplying these two terms together. So our goal is we're going to see some quadratic equations, and we're going to try and figure out what process can I go through to get it into a form that looks something similar to what I have written here. And often it's the case that when we want to figure something out, it's nice to go backwards. So in our last video we talked about foiling and how do I expand these terms. So that's where I want to start here. I'm going to FOIL this out and see what happens. Now, if you're not familiar with the term foiling, go back to our last video and there's a nice explanation there. So what we do is we take our first terms, our two x's, and we multiply them together, x squared. Then we do our outside terms, so that's plus bx. Then we do our inside terms, which is plus ax. And then we multiply our last terms, which is plus a times b. All right, so when I'm foiling, what I would like to do next is combine like terms. So if I look around, the first thing I notice is that these terms right here both have x's in them. So I'm going to combine them together. And if I have bx's and I have ax's and I put them together, what I have is I have b plus a x's. So this would be b plus a times x plus ab. All right, so this is great for me. When I see here, I notice that if I'm in factored form, so this thing up here is our factored form. So this is our factored form. And I look at these two numbers right here, a and b, that if I add them together, so by adding the two terms together, a plus b, I should get this middle term right here, so the coefficient on x. And if I multiply them together, I should get this constant term out here, a times b. And so that would put me into my general form, which is what we have here. This is our general form. Okay. So going from factored form to general form was called expanding or foiling, and that was the process of going from here to here, so going down like this. And in this video, our focus is going to be on how do I go up? How do I start in general form and then move on to factored form? Okay, so our process is going to be defined by the last observation that we just made. Find two numbers that add to our middle term, that coefficient on x. Right, so find two numbers that add to the coefficient on x right, so our x term, and multiply to the constant term. Right, so in class we looked at this and we said, all right, we did some explorations and we came up with this observation, but the reasoning behind it is right here. So going through this process of looking at it in general with just an arbitrary a and b shows us that we always are going to get, adding a and b is going to give us our coefficient on x, and multiplying a and b together is going to give us our constant term. So this will be our main process. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear this out and come back with an example. All right, we're back. we have an example in front of us. We have this function g of x equals x squared plus 7x plus 10. And what I would like to do is take this from general form, which it's currently in, and move it into factored form. So based on our last video, the previous part of this video, we want to find two numbers that add up to 7 and multiply to 10. All right, so let's write this out. Two numbers that first they add to 7, and second I want them to multiply to 10. So the way that I go about this process is the first thing that I think about is the multiplication. So there's a lot of different ways to multiply and get, add and get 7. So I can add lots of numbers and get the 7, but multiplying to 10 is a little bit more challenging, so there's less options for me to consider. All right, so when we're factoring, if I'm going to do this by hand, typically I'm hoping that it will factor in a nice way. And so the two numbers a and b won't be too strange. So hopefully, my hope is that they are integers and they're not too large or too strange. All right, so let's think about multiplying to 10. Are there some integers that I can come up with that multiply to be 10? Well, the first thing that comes to mind is I can have 1 times 10. Right, so 1 times 10 is equal to 10. And so if I think about this, can I combine 1 and 10 to get to 7? Well, 1 plus 10 is 11, and 10 minus 1 is 9. So I don't know. It doesn't seem to me like I can combine these two numbers to get my 7. Right? So I don't think I can add them up to 7. So we're going to go back to the drawing board and say, all right, this one didn't work out for us. So let's erase, and let's see if we can come up with two other numbers that multiply to be 10. So if we think about it for a second, I think 10 is 2 times 5. So 2 times 5 is equal to 10. That seems to work out. And if I add them together, if I add up this 2 and 5, so 2 plus 5 is, in fact, 7. So this is great for me. 2 plus 5 does equal 7. All right, so I found two numbers that if I multiply them together, I get 10. And if I add them up, I get 7. So let's take this and let's see if we can use this information to factor. All right, so 2 and 5 are my numbers. Let's get rid of all of this stuff. All right, and so let's get rid of this and see if we can use this information. All right, 2 and 5 were my numbers. So what should happen is this should factor into x plus 2 times x plus 5. All right, how do I know that I'm right? Well, a nice way to check would just be to go through that reverse process of foiling and see what happens. Okay, so first outside, inside, last. My first terms, x times x is x squared. My outside terms would be plus 5 times x. My inside terms would be plus 2 times x. And my last terms would be 2 times 5, which would be 10. So if we think about this process, what we have is 2 times 5 gave us 10. So that was our multiplying two numbers together to get 10. And look what we have right here in the middle, 5x and 2x, these two numbers right here, they're going to add up to be 7. So I have 5 x's and 2 more x's gives me 7 x's. And what it comes down to here is we get x squared plus 7x's plus 10. And so it turns out that this is the correct factored form. So I went through this process of thinking about two numbers that multiply to be 10 and add to be 7. And then I went through my foiling process to confirm that this was the right answer. All right, so I'm going to erase this. I'm going to come back and we'll do one more example. All right, we're back. Here's our next example. H of x equals x squared plus 6x minus 16. And so our question is, can I find two numbers that if I multiply them together, I get negative 16, but if I add them together, I get positive 6? So this would be a great opportunity for you to pause the video and try this on your own before we proceed. All right, so two numbers that multiply to be negative 16 and add to be positive 6. The process that I'm going through in my mind is I'm thinking about all the different ways that I can multiply to get 16. And so that would be things like 16 times 1, or 8 times 2, or 4 times 4. And I'm quickly doing these additions in my head. So I'm saying, okay, is it 16 and 1? Well, 16 and 1, you know, I could get up to 17, or I could go down to 15. So that's not what I want. That's not 6. 8 and 2, well, 8 plus 2 is 10, but 8 minus 2 is 6. So I can combine 2 and 8 to get to a 6. So what I need is, I need to multiply them together to get negative 16. Okay, well, it turns out that positive 8 times negative 2 does give us negative 16. So let's check that one out. So 8 and 2 plus 8, x minus 2. So positive 8, negative 2. Positive 8 times negative 2 is negative 16. Positive 8 plus negative 2 is positive 6. So I believe that this should work out. Right? So this should be my factored form. But let's go ahead and take it one step further. Let's do our check. Let's FOIL it out. First terms, x squared. Outside terms, minus 2x, right? So x times negative 2 is minus 2x. Inside terms, plus 8x. Plus 8 times negative 2 gives us negative 16. Final thing, combine our like terms. In the middle here, we have all of our x's. So negative 2x plus 8x gives us plus 6x. So x squared plus 6x. And then we have a minus 16 on the outside. So it turns out that this was good for us. We checked it, and this is our factored form. Right, so I hope these videos helped, and I'll post some more about our explorations through quadratic functions.